Hello, Mark. My name is Tinson. My student number is 56. I'm a freshman. Theaster gets how to revive a neighborhood with imagination, beauty, and art. I'm a potter. We seem like a very humble vocation. I know a lot about pots. I've spent about 50 years making them. One of the things that really excites me in my artistic practice and being trained as a potter is that you very quickly learn how to make great things out of nothing. That I spend a lot of time at my wheel with my mom of class trying stuff, and that the limitations of my capacity, my ability was based on my hand and my imagination. That if I wanted to make a really nice ball, and I didn't know how to make a food yet, I would have to learn how to make a food. That process of learning has been very helpful to my life. I feel like as a potter, you also start to learn how to shape the world. There have been times in my artistic capacity that I wanted to reflect on other really important moments in the history of the U.S., the history of the world where such things happened. But how do you talk about such ideas without separating people from that content? Could I use art like these old, discontinued firehouses from Alabama to talk about the complexity of a moment of a civil rights in the 60s? It is possible to talk about my father and I doing the lab projects. My dad was a roofer, construction guy. He owned small business, and as 18, he was ready to retire, and his top cattle was my inheritance. Now, a top cattle doesn't sound like much of an inheritance. It wasn't it. It was stinky and it took up a lot of space in my studio. But I asked my dad if you would be willing to make some art with me, if you could reimagine this kind of nothing material as something very special. And by elaborating the material and my dad's skill, could we start to think about art just like clay in a new way, shaping it differently, helping us to imagine what was possible. After that, I was then kind of turned onto a lot of different kind of material, and my studio grew a lot because I saw, well, it's not really about material, it's about our capacity to shape things. I became more and more interested in idea, and more things that were happening just outside my studio. Just to give you a little bit of context, I live in Chicago. I live in the South Side now. I'm a West Sider. For those of you who are not Chicagoans, that don't mean anything. But if you didn't mention that I was a West Sider, there will be a lot of people in the city that will be very upset. The neighborhood that I live in, the Grand Crossing, is a neighborhood that has been better days. It is not a gated community by far. There's a lot of abandonment in my neighborhood. And while I was kind of busy making pot and busy making art and having a good art career, there was all of this stuff that was happening just outside my studio. All of us know about failing housing market and the challenges of the bride. And I feel like we talk about it with some of our cities more than others. But I think a lot of our U.S. cities and beyond have the challenge of blight. Abandoned building that people no longer know what to do anything with. And so I thought, is there a way that I could start to think about this building as an extension or inspection of my artistic practice? And that if I was thinking along with other creatives, architects, engineers, real estate finance people. Let's use together might be able to kind of thinking more complicated way about the reshaping of cities. And so bought a building. The building is really affordable. We check it out. We made it as beautiful as we could do, trying to just get some activity happening on my block. Once I bought a building for about $18,000. I didn't have any money left, so I started to sweeping the building as a kind of performance. This is performance art, and the people who would come over, and I would start sweeping because the broom was free and the sweeping was free. It worked out. Laughter, but we would use the building land to stage inspection, small dinner, and we find that that building on my block, Theaster. We now refer it to the block as Theaster project. That in a way, that building became a kind of gathering sign for lots of different kind of activities. We turned the building into what we call now the archive house. The archive house will do all of this amazing thing. Very significant people in the city and beyond will find themselves in the middle of the hood. And that's when I feel like maybe there was a relationship between my history with clay and this new thing that was starting to develop. That we were slowly starting to reshape how people imagine the south side of the city. One house turned into a few houses, and we always tried to suggest that not only is creating a beautiful vessel important, but the contents of what happened in those buildings is also very important. So we are not only thinking about development, but we are thinking about the program, thinking about the kind of connections that could happen between one house and another, between one neighbor and another. This building became what we call the listening house, and it was a collection of discarded books from the Johnson Publishing Corporation and other books from an art bookstore that was going out of business. I was actually just wanting to activate this building as much as I could with whatever and whoever would join me. In Chicago, there's amazing building stock. This building, which had been a former crack house on the block, and when the building became abandoned, it became a great opportunity to really imagine what else could happen there. So this space were converted into what we call Black Cinema House. Black Cinema House was an opportunity that in the hood to screen film that were important to relevant to the folk who live around me. That if you wanted to show an older villain than people film, we could. If we wanted to show car rush, we could. They would be awesome. The building we soon outgrew, and we have to move to a larger space. Black Cinema House, we had made from just a small piece of clay, had to grow into a much larger piece of clay, which is now my studio. What I realized was that for those of you who are zoning junkie, that some of the things that I was doing in this building that had been left behind, they were not the use by which the building was built, and that they were city policies that say, hey, a house that is residential need to stay residential. But what do you do in neighborhood when aren't nobody interested in living there? Let the people who have the means to live have already left. What do you do with this abandoned building? And so I was trying to wake them up using culture. We find that was so exciting for folk, and the people was responsive and the people were so responsive to the work that we have to then find a bigger building. By the time we find bigger building, there was in part the resources necessary to think about those things. In this bank that we call the art bank, it was a pretty bad shape. There was about 6 feet of standing water. It was a difficult project of finance because banks wasn't interested in the neighborhood, because people wasn't interested in the neighborhood, because nothing had happened there. It was there, it was nothing, it was nowhere. And so we just started imagining what else could happen in this building. Applause. And so now that rumor of my blog was spread, and a lot of people are starting to visit. We have found that the brand can now be a center of exhibition, archive, music performer, and that there are people who are now interested in being adjacent to those buildings because we brought some hit. That we kind of made a fire. One of the archives that we have there is this Johnson Publishing Corporation. We have also started to collect memorabilia from American history, from people who live or have lived in the neighborhood. Some of these images are discredited images of black people, kind of histories of very challenging content. And we're better than a neighborhood with young people who are constantly asking themselves about their identity, to talk about some of the complexity of race and class. In Sunday, the band represents a hub that we are trying to create a pretty hardcore note of cultural activity, and that if we could start to make a multiple hub and connect some cool green stuff around there. That's the building that we have purchased and rehabbed, which is now around 16 or 17 units. That if we could let miniature vessels on top of that, and connect this building by a beautiful green belt approach, that this place where people never wanted to be will become an important destination for folk from all over the country and the world. In some days, it feels very, very much like I'm Potter. That we tackle the thing that are at our will. We try with the skill that we have to talk about this next bar or I want to make. And it went from a bar to a singular house to a block to a neighborhood to a cultural district to thinking about the city. And at every point there were things that I didn't know that I have to learn. I've never learned so much about zoning role in my life. I never thought I have to. But as a result of that, I find that there's not just room for my own artistic practice. There's a room for a lot of other artistic practices. So people started asking us, well, sister, how are you going to go to scale? And what's your sustainability plan? Laughter, applause. And what I found was that I couldn't explore myself. That was things necessary in cities like Akron, Ohio, and Detroit, Michigan, and Gary, Indiana. It's that there are people in those places who already believe in those places. They are already dying to make those places beautiful, and less often those people who are passionate about a place are disconnected from the resources necessary to make full things happen, or disconnected from the contingency of people that could help make things happen. So now we are starting to give advice around the country on how to start with what you got, how to start with the things with the things that are in front of you, how to make something out of nothing, how to reshape your world as a wheel or as your block or as the scale of the cities. Thank you so much. Applause. Jen Cohen. Thank you. So I see many people watching this will be asking themselves the question you just raised at the end. How can they do this in their own city? You can explore yourself. Give us a few pages out of your playbook about what someone who is inspired our their city can do to take on project like yours. Sister Gaz, one of the things I have found that's really important is giving through to not just the kind of individual project like an old house, but what's the relationship between an old house, a local school, a small bodyguard, and is there some kind of synergy between those things? Can you get those folk talking? And finally, like in cases where neighborhoods have failed, they still often have a pause. How do you identify the pause in that place and the passionate people, and then how do you get folk who have been fighting, slogging for 20 years, re-energized about the place that they live, and then so someone had to do that work. If I were a traditional developer, I would be talking about building a room, and then putting a full LED sign in the window. I think that you actually have to I think that you actually have to curate more than that. There's a way in which you have to be mindful about what are the business that I want to grow here, and then are there people who live in this place who want to grow those business with me? Because I think it's not just a cultural aspect of housing. There has to be the recreation of an economic code. So thinking about those things together feel right. JC, it's hard to get people to create the spark again when people have been slogging for 20 years. Are there any methods you find that have helped breaking through? TG, yet I think that now there are a lot of examples of folk who are doing amazing work, but those methods are sometimes like when the media is constantly saying that only violent things happen in a place. Then based on your skill set and the particular context, what are the things that you can do in your neighborhood to kind of find some of that? So I find that if you are a theater person, you have all those 3 theater festivals. In some cases, you don't have the resources in certain neighborhoods to do things that are a certain kind of selection. But if you can then find a way of making sure that people who are local to a place, plus people who could be supported of the things that are happening locally, when those people get together, I think really amazing things can happen. This is so interesting. And how can you make sure that the project you are creating are actually for the disadvantage, are not just for the sort of vegetarian indeed wood crowd? Let's my rule into take advantage of land. TG, right on. So I think this is where it starts to get into thick weed. JC, let's go there. TG, right now. Grade crossing is 99% break, or at least living. And we know that maybe who own property in a place is different from who talk the street every day. So it's reasonable to say that Green Cross is already in the process of being something different than it is today. But are there ways to think about housing trust or land trust or a mission-based development that starts to protect some of the space that happens? Because when you have 7,500 empty lots in a city, you want something to happen there, but you need an entities that are not just interested in the development piece, but entities that are interested in the stabilization piece. And I feel like often the developer piece is really motivated by the other work of a kind of neighborhood consciousness. That part doesn't live anymore. So how do you start grow up important watchdog that ensure that the resources that are made available to new folk that are coming in are also distributed to folk who have lived in a place for a long time? They see. That makes so much sense. One more question. You make such a compelling case for beauty and the important beauty of the arts. There would be others who will argue that fine would be better spent on best service for the disadvantage. How do you combat that viewpoint or come against it? TG, I believe that beauty is best service approach. Often that I have found is that when there are resources that have not been made available to certain under-resourced cities or neighborhoods or communities, that sometimes culture is the thing that helps to ignite. And that I can do anything, but I think that there's a way in which if you can start with a culture and get people kind of reinvested in their place, other kinds of adjacent amenities start to grow, and then people can make a demand that's a positive demand, and the political demand that are necessary to wake up our cities that also become very positive. JC, it makes perfect sense to me, sister. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Thank you, sister guest. Applause.